Welcome back to the class, everyone. If you're anything like me, you're probably just now getting around to setting your 3v3 defense. And then with that in mind, it's about time that we ranked the top 40 3v3 teams, except this time with a twist that we've been doing in 5v5. No Conquest characters. As I explained in the 5v5 iteration of this video, the reason why we're doing no Conquest characters and no Galactic Legends is because we will rotate using them and not using them. This will not only allow me to not make the same really repetitive video every 2 months, but it will also hopefully serve as a better base for different players who one can take from a Conquest type video and one that doesn't include them at all. And I will say, one of the things that happens in 3v3 a lot at the upper level, when you have really strong characters like Galactic Legends or Conquest characters, their power is really emphasized even more in 3v3 because the enemy team trying to take them down just naturally has less tools since they're limited to 3 characters instead of 5. I go on that slight tangent there just to say that our S tier, like the higher echelon teams that we have for 3v3 without Conquest characters, are really far and just few between. Like, there's not many of them at all. We have Bo-Katan that is definitely cut out for Lord Vader. By the way, one of the things that represents the S tier is the fact that they are a really big staple either defensively or on offense, taking out a high caliber team, aka a Galactic Legend or a variety of Conquest characters. So Bo-Katan being here is a great example of this. She has Lord Vader's number. Even when Lord Vader is propped up by some of his better Datacrons, she might not be the overall 100% counter, but she is typically one of the better options. Now, I do prefer Bam in here, but we're going to use Paz because ultimately he works, and Bam might be more versatile in some of the other teams we're going to look at. Next up is going to be what I call the weird Sith trio or fake Scion here with Savage, and basically we're utilizing both Darth Traya and Savage's Omicrons, and this team is just such a pain in the butt for 3v3. They have everything they need. You have your damage through Nihilus Annihilates, Savage is an amazing tank, and then Traya on top of that provides a lot of utility with her GAC Omicron over her unique that just causes a lot of issues that I really don't want to go into because it's a long read. But overall, defensively, most people end up having to burn a Galactic Legend like C to be able to get through them, which becomes quite complicated in 3v3 where there's more teams, and you might have something bigger like Malgus or Malicus that you want to use C against, making them, again, an S tier team. Next up is going to be Inquisitors. Pretty much the same concept as our good friend Bo-Katan, except for she has much more, or Reva specifically, has much more qualifications against JML and even JMK, depending on the Datacron season. Starkiller really has raised number a lot of the time. Can beat some of the other Galactic Legends, I think specifically Jabba. I'm not very privy to that counter, but I know a lot of people who do use it. I believe they typically have to have an advantage in some way, whether it be Relics, Datacrons, Omicrons, but the counter remains open all the same. And this one is just, pun intended, merciless speculation. I don't have Balin. Nobody's had Balin in 3v3 with Omicrons. We have no idea how good he's going to be. I'm guessing with the precedent of the recent legendaries and the fact that it's a Datacron right now and his Omicrons look good, he's going to fall somewhere to the camp that Bo-Katan did. Bo-Katan Mandalore, that is. Both with the Datacron and without, I think he's going to be really a pest to handle on defense with the Datacron. But even without the Datacron, he really just seems to have JMK and Cat's number. There's so many things in the kit that just completely cancel them out. So with those 5 really high long-term teams out of the way for S tier, let's talk about the A tier teams. And you're going to notice a lot of our previous Conquest character teams that used to be in the S tier are going to get, I guess, demoted to A tier, but that's still really good. I mean, you need 30 teams in 3v3 between offense and defense, so, like, these are still amazing. First up, let's talk about Darth Revan without Malgus. Honestly, still fantastic, amazing, wonderful team. While it is inferior to Malgus, it's really not that far of a stretch. Again, in 3v3, a lot of the more powerful characters like Darth Revan and Darth Malak really get emphasized even more, because then these other teams that need 5 characters to beat them, like Imperial Troopers, they just don't have what it takes to be able to get there. The counter does kind of exist, but it's significantly messier than it is in 5v5. So we definitely get the space here. Quite frankly, there are some times where his lead is even kind of fun to use because the death mark here can be beneficial, especially because CG keeps giving characters in leaders positions taunt, and Darth Revan really likes hitting said characters. Next up is going to be Gidme. I love Gidme. I've not used Gidme for a minute ever since DTMG stole Moff Gideon, but if you don't have Conquest characters, this is something you can utilize. The whole concept here is the fact that Padme and Shakti, or really any support GR, are going to get a ton of protection up from control the situation. They will not lose turn meter because of Padme's unique, so they'll be at pretty much 100% turn meter with 20 stacks of courage, because that's what Padme's leadership does to protection up. And then you just delete any high health character that isn't immune to max health damage. I've used this before on a Star Killer Malicos team. It was fantastic. I was very happy, but it can also beat other teams out there. Pretty much anything that Gideon can get ahead of that isn't immune to max health damage, they can delete. It's very fun. If you don't delete them, you probably will get trashed, and that's probably worth saying. Next up is going to be Rogue One. Rogue One we had recently listed as a B team, and the team just has way too much anti-Empire synergy, and there are way too many good Empire teams still hanging around. And they don't even necessarily need to beat like Lord Vader and Starkiller that kind of have a mix of other factions in there. But the fact that they can every now and then, pretty much every other season, beat DTMG or Reva, like that's really good. That's really, really good. And even when they can't do that, I guess still beating Iden or Veer still counts for something. So we're putting them in this higher tier because they have a shot again at some of those higher teams, which really does represent the A tier. They might not be beating Galactic Legends, but they have a pretty good shot at teams kind of in this area, or at least one of them at a minimum. Next up, we're going to be Gungans. And I'm a little bit sad to put Gungans this low in 3v3. But I do think it's where they belong. They've shown to be very good in 5v5, even without the Boss Nass or the Jar Jar Binks Datacrons. But at the same time, the team really was built for 5v5, because you ultimately are left with the decision that kind of sucks no matter what you want to do. Either you have to have Phalanx in here, and great, they can't immediately get to the shield generator, but you have like no damage. Like none of these characters do good damage. Or you can have the reverse, you can put in Captain Tarpals here, you can get some good damage, and now your shield generator's entirely exposed, and you just get completely destroyed by Traya. Which again, is a kind of an upper team, but still, it becomes a safe counter that people would just hold every single time and just wipe you out. And I think there's some other ones right now. I don't currently have .gg's data to go over with this, so we're going to be a little bit more on Calvin's opinion than we are on data for this round. Next up is going to be Seer with no Malicos, with Crew and Fulcrum. Really kind of a pain in the butt team. I will say that you do want to have the leadership Omicron if you want it to be a better team. The big reason is they become immune to Daze, which really cuts out Bad Batch entirely out as a counter. You still can use Bounty Hunters, but I've had Fulcrum delete my Mando before, and it's not fun. So there are counters, not the best counters in the world. Next up is going to be Budget Bow. We recently talked about having our good friend Bam here in another team, and pretty much the whole concept here is if you can land things right so that Bam's damage immunity goes on to Fennec, when Maul starts unleashing all of his stacks of whatever, you can have an outside shot at beating Lord Vader. Now, you don't necessarily need to have Mando here. It's going to depend on the enemy team comp. If there's Thrawn in there, that's also going to make things more complicated for Lord Vader. But the reason why I'm showing these two specifically is because this is also another counter to the Inquisitors that we mentioned earlier if you run into them on defense. While it is not 100%, one of the really fun things that you can do is that when Bam procs his damage immunity and he puts damage immunity on himself and whatever one of the other characters, he will also cleanse himself. The really funny thing this does is that will apply Death Mark because of Reva's leadership Omicron. And what ends up happening is you have a character with locked Death Mark as well as locked damage immunity, essentially giving yourself an invincible tank. This can then buy the rest of your team enough time through cleansing all the debuffs, because the Inquisitors have a lot, hence Fennec lead, for the Mandalorian to defeat Reva. It's actually very fun. It doesn't always end in a one-shot, but a lot of the times two-shotting one of those higher level teams is fantastic. General Skywalker, he's a staple. We won't talk a whole lot about him just because he's really good. I personally still really like him on defense just because CLS is not the same counter as it is in 5v5. Aphra doesn't necessarily have one team that she just completely trashes in 3v3, but from a cleanup perspective, I believe she beats 6 out of the 8 Galactic Legends, which is awesome. If you're wondering which one she doesn't, really want to say it's like JMK and maybe Leia. Again, I don't have my data right now, but from previous searches, she is just a clean up queen. Maybe it was Lord Vader. At any rate, very good team. Tuskens, one slight note, if you want to have this team be good, you have to have this exact combination. Has to be Tusken Raider Omicron, has to be these two in the other slots. There's really no negotiating there. You can put Dad Bod Boba in this last slot, but you start to open yourself up to other counters, specifically like the Gidme that we talked about earlier, because you don't have a tank to get in the way from the very beginning. There's too many things here. It's anti-turn meter. You want to have an anti-revive. There's a lot of things going on. Resistance, pain in the butt team if you ever had to fight it. Every single character on the team having a cleanse is a huge pain, because that pretty much means if one of them isn't ability blocked or stunned, that means none of them are. I hate it. It's ruined matches for me. I don't want to talk about it anymore. Next up is going to be the Malgus Killer. While you do not have to use this exact iteration, you can pretty much use some lesser characters like Bastila Shan as well as Plo Koon along with Cal, and you get a target, or you get to target a much higher level character without having to really have Omicrons, by the way. Cal Kestis just has a ton of anti-Malgus stuff built into his kit, one of which being when they are inflicted with fear, they gain damage immunity and 60% turn meter. Malgus likes to give out fear a lot. You also can't increase their cooldowns. Malgus also likes to do that. Just a lot of stuff going on there. Insta-kill is also really nice for Malgus. So lots going on there in the Malgus department. And last but not least is going to be our SLKR Killer. Again, one of the things that marks the A-teams is the fact that they have one of the big game hunting enemies out there they can actually tackle. SLKR can fall prey to this. The concept is really cool here. You pretty much get Darth Revan to trigger Savior, meaning he will drop below the threshold where armor needs him to be able to give him 3 stacks of Beskar. You put 3 stacks of Beskar on him, and it pretty much makes him impossible to kill because SLKR can't crit him at all. And then as long as Jedi Knight Revan is alive, Jedi Knight Luke will not be targeted for mastery reduction, which buys Jedi Knight Luke enough time to actually kill SLKR. It's really something you should see in a video to fully understand it, but the concept is there and it can be very useful, especially if there isn't some crazy datacron on SLKR. Now moving on to the B tier. These teams are all good, but you will notice that this is a really heavy section just full of teams, and it's because of what we were talking about earlier. A lot of the B teams could be A teams in some way, but without the remaining 2 characters from 5v5, they kind of end up falling short because they don't just have one overpowered character to carry them like a Galactic Legend team would. So first up is going to be our good friend Iden. Really has Mon Mothma as well as CLS number. You will see them in this B tier as well. The new Enoch, Death Trooper, Night Trooper team, I wasn't exposed to it that much, but the times I was, you had to have something to beat it, but you didn't have to have the best thing to beat it. CLS, a really good team, unfortunately has been figured out. There's a number of counters. I've used Jedi Knight Luke lead with some, I think Cam before was a really popular counter. Some people use Bad Batch, some people use JTR. There's a long variety. Not all those counters are great, but you have a lot of options. Bad Batch really just, they get cut out of so many things. A lot of the newer teams that have come up, they just get all these immunities or are able to immediately cleanse days. Gungans and Seer are really 2 good examples of that. So they just get held back. They still do beat things, just not as many things as we would like them to. Han Chewbacca, you do not have to use Hondo as a lead. You can kind of use whatever lead you want. I like Hondo here because it's really fun to lock up one enemy, stun another enemy, and then stun the 3rd enemy when Han eventually does get to his first real turn. So there's a lot of control here, but I mean, you can use Wedge, you can use Greedo. The team will beat something. Qui-Gon Jinn, love it on offense. Still not all that bad on defense. You can kind of control it, not as well as you can in 5v5, but it's still doable. Newt Gunray, love the concept of this team. This is an old team, but it still checks out. And basically the concept here is you can't immediately knock off any of these characters. So Jango will start in damage immunity, Newt Gunray has a revive, and then B1, I mean, you can eventually kill him with paper cuts, but at the same time, doesn't matter if you're doing 1 billion damage or 1 damage, you're still only getting rid of 8 or 6 stacks of B1 battle droid, whatever the amount is. Next up is going to be Imperial Troopers. Again, a team that suffers highly from not being able to use all 5 characters to be able to get a better turn meter train going. That being said, you put the mark on Dark and he can still punch things into next week. So the team is not just garbage. It's still good, just not as good as it would be in 5v5. Saw, I'm not allowed to put Luthen in here because Conquest Characters, so he does fall down a tier. This team is still annoying, especially if you have his Omicron, he gets to go first and whatnot. We have our good friend Mon Mothma as well as Kyle Katarn. Team is annoying. We do want to cut out Pow as well as Hoth Rebel Scout for this specific 3v3 comp, just because you can't really get a full turn meter train going with all 5 of them similar to Imperial Troopers, so you might as well just take the damage and the survivability with these 2. Not amazing, but also not bad. Next up is going to be Dash. Dash, actually, maybe he should actually be a little bit higher, Dash, because we did beat JML with Dash last 3v3. It was absolutely incredible. It was based entirely off of this. I don't know if this is working as intended or not, but basically what has been happening is that Dash is getting stacking amounts every single time he dies and comes back. It's like this unique stacks. So there's one point where Dash was critting on his basic and he was getting 100% turn meter and just completely looping JML because JML had killed him about 1 billion times from Vandor constantly reviving him. So very good team, a little bit situationally used. A defense, it's not all that solid overall, but still, yeah, he probably should be A-tier team. So take note of that. Next up is going to be Wampa. Much longer shelf life in 3v3 than 5v5. Doesn't always get somewhere to be used, but definitely more in 5v5. especially when people keep putting down Grievous. Next up is going to be Night Sisters. Very easy solution of bounty hunters. Just be wise enough to not try to kill someone immediately so that they get instant defeat immunity. Save Mando's big hit for when they don't have it, and you're pretty much good. They don't really have enough offensive viability to take you out, and you can kind of keep cleansing the stuns as they come. Next up is going to be the Rex Sandwich. Again, good team. It's just been mostly figured out. I use Qui-Gon Jinn against it every time. It never fails. It's fine. Next up is going to be C tier. And I will say, even though these are like the lowest tier of teams we're working with here, these guys aren't bad. They're just outclassed. It's the same thing we always run into. It's not that Kelleran Beck lead or Jango or Boba Fett lead is necessarily bad for 3v3. It's just that these teams and these teams and these teams are better. So first up is Kelleran Beck. The team really isn't magical in any way. It just has all the right elements that would make a good team. Good leadership, good tank, good damage, little elements of support all around. Next up is going to be Boba Fett. This is probably my favorite 3v3 team, even the fact that it just isn't very good in the modern game. Basically, the whole concept revolves around the fact that Boba Fett actually gives speed based off of which enemies have debuffs, and Zam will go first, and she will apply debuffs, giving your team more speed. On top of that, the thermal detonator synergy is really nice because you get turn meter based off of Boba lead. Boba lead, did they just like put a whole bunch of stuff in it? Yeah, 15 speed for each debuffed enemy. And it makes it really hard as a defensive team to clock because you don't know how many of Zam's debuffs are going to land. So it can make it tricky to figure out where you're going to fit in with things. If you're going to get ability blocked, if you're going to get tenacity down, if you're not, it's hard to tell unless there's a huge speed disparity. Next up is Grievous. Grievous definitely is plagued by 5v5 in the sense, or 3v3 in the sense that he can't use everything that he wants to use. He doesn't have 2 extra droids to take max health from, nor to get bonus turns from when they die. It's still annoying. You can still put it on defense. I mean, I guess Wampa will eat it, but at the same time, maybe Wampa would have eaten your Iden. I don't know. Play strategically. Next up is going to be JTR with R2 and BB-8. Again, an old favorite team of mine. Does not have a lot of legs in today's meta just because even the stuff that it does counter, like CLS, there is likely better stuff out there. Sortie, annoying defense team. It can still be beaten as long as you have enough offense to be able to get through Sortie yourself, and the other two just kind of crumble because the team doesn't really have a dedicated tank. Could use all 3, I guess, but then you lose a lot of the other support options. Geonosians, still pretty fun. Bosk, I realize that we've used Mando more than once. You can sub Grief into either team depending on what you're trying to face, but it's about an hitter team. You guys know how it works. Next up is going to be our Hux team. I like this team if they can just completely one-shot one character right at the bat with Hux's mass assist. The reality is, though, a lot of teams are either too tanky or have a pre-taunting tank that will stop that, or maybe they're fast enough, or maybe they stop turn meter. I don't know. Or maybe they stop counters in general or assisting. So there's too many like flaws with the team for it to be consistently taking stuff out, at least at the very high level. Still not a bad team. If you can do that, it's really fun to watch the rest of the team crumble when you do. And then there's Wookiees. Pretty defensively annoying. Can still be taken out by things like Bad Batch, but overall, they're still in the top 40 teams. Last but not least, I do want to give them a special mention just because I have no idea where they go. But yeah, Great Mothers. Great Mothers has a really powerful datacron even right now. It was here last 3v3. It's really good. I legitimately do not know if they're S tier, if they're A tier, if they're B tier. They're probably A, just because of the interactions they have with Gungans and stripping protection right at the bat. But at the same time, I don't know. And I don't think we'll even know by the end of the season because most people who have them are still using that Great Mother's datacron. So that is going to be it for today. Let me know what you guys think and what you think of the format without Conquest characters, if it's just as likable as the 5v5 version. Thank you for watching. Until the next time, stay awesome.